Okay, so now welcome to my new video. and department for families to rent upstairs. I played with other children who lived in the building, in the corridors, up and down the stairs, and sometimes even on the flat rooftop. We never played in the street. They were too narrow and too crowded with hawkers, street sellers, and passersby. If we got tired of playing, we could talk. We could look down on the ever-changing street scenes from the balconies of our apartments. Although I passed my days happily enough, I realize now that my mother and my great aunt, who helped to bring us up, must often have worried about what might become of us. Auntie must have been particularly concerned to prepare us for a further that might not be easy, because she told my sister and me the story, the piece of pork, over and over again. Hardly a day passed without us hearing this tale from her, and because it was such a constant part of my childhood, I will tell it here. Once upon a time, in a very poor village in China, there lived a very small family of just two people, a grandfather and his grandson. The old man and the boy who lived together in a cramped hut were all that were left of a large family. The rest had passed away from hunger and disease. Because the grandfather was old and not very well, he could no longer work hard in the fields and had to his living by doing odd jobs. He could earn only a little now and again. So, he and his grandson were among the worst of people in the village. People living on rice gruel and adding vegetables whenever they could afford them. Sometimes they went hungry for days at a time. One day the boy saw his grandfather come home from the market with a big piece of pork. He was amazed because they only ate meat once or twice a year on special occasions, and then only in very small quantities. "Are we going to celebrate something, Granddad?" he asked, but the old man only replied, "Maybe." Before lunch, the grandfather began to prepare the meat, but instead of slicing it for frying or steaming in the usual way, he covered the whole piece with salt as though he wanted to preserve it. Then he suspended it from the ceiling of the hut so that it hung directly over the table. Having done that, he cooked some rice, and when it was ready, he put balls and chopsticks on the table and called his grandson to eat. The boy took a mouthful of plain, boiled rice, then looked up at the meat hanging out of reach above the table. His grandfather watched him, then said, "Go on, have another piece. Doesn't it taste salty?" The poor boy looked at him in amazement. "Go on, eat it," said the grandfather again. "Taste the salt." "How can I taste the salt when you don't ever give me a small piece to eat, grandfather?" asked the boy. "If you think about it long enough, you will taste the salt," replied the grandfather calmly as he finished his rice. I was 8 when Auntie first told me that story, and I heard it hundreds of times without knowing what it meant. It was a strange story, the meat hanging there and the boy unable to touch it. It made you think. After a long time, when I was about 10, I finally asked, "Auntie, what is that story all about?" Why couldn't the poor boy have some meat? And she explained to me, "You are a child. but you must start to think about your future and what you are going to do in life. You must decide what you would like and where to get it. But if you can't get what you want, well, then you just have to dream about it. And of course, that's what the child in the story was doing, eating rice but dreaming about the meat. He was learning to endure. My great aunt brought that story with her from China to Cambodia, and a few years ago, before Cambodia fell, my uncle told me he had learned the very same story from his grandfather in China. When I was in Thailand recently, I saw a Thai film and the story, The Piece of Pork, was told in it. So what was originally Chinese folk tale has been rooted in Cambodia and Thailand. Although I was brought up speaking Teochew, I cannot read or write Chinese. I was educated in the Cambodian language at a Cambodian school. A Chinese education was very expensive. The schools were private, fees were high, the uniforms and books were far from cheap. The Cambodian schools were government supported. All you needed were your pens and books, and your mother could easily make the short and shirt that made up the simple uniform. You didn't even have to wear shoes. Besides, if you wanted to work outside the Chinese community, you needed Cambodian or another language like French or English. When people ask me, "What are you?" I always answer, "I'm a Chinese, born in Cambodia." I feel Cambodia is my country, my motherland, but culturally, I'm a Chinese. And that is why I have told a Chinese story here. The story The Piece of Pork teaches that people have to learn to live without things they would dearly like to have. Many of us from Cambodia have had to live with the almost impossible, the loss of family, dear friends, home, country. I hope that in Australia, no one will ever have to experience the extremes that our parents and we have lived through. Okay, so that is all about our story entitled The Piece of Pork. So I hope you understand something from this and try to think of its meaning. Yeah, the moral of the story is so meaningful to apply in our life. Okay? So if you like my video, please subscribe to my channel, okay, and get notification. Yeah. Please leave a comment if you want to. Okay, thank you everyone.